Hi everyone. I'm just typing a little note while your sound and vision is coming up to say where I'm from. I'm the moderator for today. My name's Bridget. And if you would like to type in the chat where you're coming from today, that would be lovely. And if you are happy to come on camera, I'm sure Sharon and Alexis would love to see your faces. I know that not everybody might feel safe or good doing that, but it's certainly helpful for presenters to be able to see faces, and especially when we're chatting about stuff in this kind of forum. So welcome, everyone. And thank you, Victoria in South London, and Elise from Brooklyn, New York, Elizabeth Jane from Rutland. I'm recognizing some of these names from other sessions. Hi, Ashley from Portland. I should have said I'm from South Australia because nobody knows Ghana country probably. It's in Adelaide. Erla, west coast of Canada, Harrison Hot Springs. That sounds amazing. And Chloe from Green Bay. Thanks everyone for putting your name and where you're from in the chat. And thank you, Victoria, for letting people in. And Christina from Wurundjeri Lands in Melbourne. Hi, Christina. And Lou from Victoria, BC. Hi there. Serena from Orange in New South Wales. Georgie from Fold Coast. Welcome. Oh, thank you, Sharon. You're at Lake Erox. I'm not sure how to say Squillets.
Scowlet's territory. I'm close to where someone said they were at Harrison's Hot Springs, which it's like so rare to other folks to be in that area. So Erla, hi.
Hi, Sharon. We're neighbors. We are neighbors. Yes.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Where am I up to? Blackburn Verity from Blackburn and another Australian. Hi, Meredith from Melbourne. And we're at 10:30, so I can't see anyone else in the waiting room. So if everyone's okay, we're just going to get started. So I mentioned before that my name is Bridget. I'm the moderator for this session today. And just before we start, I'm just going to quickly go through a couple of little housekeeping things. First of all, that closed captions are available along the bottom of your screen if you would like to use them. Second of all, if you need to change the view to suit yourself, it's normally in the top right-hand corner of the screen. And if you wish to ask a question, you can put up your hand and certainly come and ask it in the with your voice verbally. But if you would rather type it in the chat, then that's okay too. But just put question in capital letters before you type it in so that we know that that's a question. And I am just going to now introduce you. So our conversation today, it's going to focus on ritual in connection to death and grief, and this includes meeting the needs of the deceased and the bereaved, the loss of ritual in dominant culture, rites of passage for the deceased, and creating ritual when in cultural disconnect. And so I would like to introduce you to Alexis Hughes, who is an end-of-life or death doula, and Sin Eater, who guides families, the dying, and loved ones along the path to the end of life, and also creates rituals for sin absolution. And our other presenter today is Sharon Pink, who is a community priestess, tarot reader, and witch who leads transitional rituals inspiring for birth and death. And Sharon teaches regularly in community to those she has shared spiritual practices with and also those she has not. So welcome, Alexis Hughes and Sharon Pink. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, so my name's Alexis, as she said, and I am from Chattanooga, Tennessee, so I specialize kind of in Appalachian ritual, Appalachian history ritual, and the historical and anthropological practice of sin eating.
Yeah, and I'm Sharon Pink. I live on Scouts territory in just about an hour and a half east of Vancouver, Canada. Um, I'm right in this moment, I'm on Duwamish territory in so-called Seattle. And my practice as a witch and someone who's had a enormous time around death in my life in a lot of different ways. So it's sort of a real area of interest and just an area of practice, and I think the comfort and familiarity with for me. So yeah.
Well, let's kick it off. We've got kind of like a four-part-ish segment here of going through the discussion on ritual. So why do we need ritual? What's the point of it? Why do we do it at all? Any thoughts in the chat? Sharon, you want to throw some thoughts in there? Why do we need ritual? Why do we
Sure.
as a species need it?
I feel like ritual for me is always a container of some kind. So it actually like carves out the space to process as need be, and the space like emotionally, spiritually, and I think especially living in very you know busy capitalist societies that don't always prioritize and value that sort of like container to really like have our process and practice this as an important part of yeah, ritual is an important part of our existence. Yeah.
Yeah, I received that. I received that. I think to piggyback off what you said, there's a sense of connection that comes with ritual, because if we understand the ritual, we understand the space that we are in, and there's kind of a social contract, a social condition that we understand parameters of expression, and it as a human being, we love control. We don't like the unknown. We don't like things that we don't understand. So a ritual is a process, like someone said in the chat, that we can anchor ourselves to for a sense of control and safety and a methodology of being able to process through things.
Mhm. Yeah, maybe I'll
Seen a
just
few
read out
things
a
put in the
few.
chat as well. Oh,
Oh,
you're
you
ahead
go
of
ahead,
me,
Bridget.
Sharon. Go for it.
Yeah, no, you go
Well,
for
would
it.
you like
Yeah.
me to read them out?
Yeah.
So Elise said that ritual is to mark time and to symbolize change. And Ashley has said it helps us adjust to transitions. And Meredith said ritual enables us to move from a workaday mindset into a state of being where things that might feel inaccessible to us in everyday life can be engaged with and experienced. So thanks, everyone.
Those are great answers too. And to kind of piggyback off what Meredith said, where we can be engaged with and experienced, ritual sometimes also is a tool for explanation as well. Like I said, we don't like the unexplained. The human mind just can't kind of wrap itself around things we don't understand, like death and dying is one of those great unknowns. So if we can incorporate ritual, especially with what I see in like sin eating, the family is trying to exert control over the descendant's instinct. You know, this, well, we don't know if they were right with their deity before they left this plane, so we want to act to make sure that they see the good place forever. You know, so control and ritual and working your way through things, I think, are very super important to ritual.
Yeah, I think about that kind of like what do you have in your power to do, and oftentimes too thinking about like what in ritual feels sincere to you. And I know that Shauna, who is going to be the third person to join us today, who wasn't able to make it for this, but had really talked about like in sort of when our dominant culture can be really disconnected from disconnected from a ritual and our practice of ritual. It's like to bring us back into like this sort of sincere relationship with whatever our with whatever our traditions, our lineages, etc. are. So yeah.
And that's a really great point that you touch on about like rituals throughout history. I mean, some of the most famous death rituals everyone probably knows about is like the Egyptian mummy process and things like that. There's the Viking ship burials and Catholic masses, the Hindu cremation ceremonies. And then we kind of have our secular rites like funerals, memorial tattoos, candlelight vigils. So we've had and created multiculturally since I guess the invent of death, as it were, to people. We've done ritual and formed some sort of meaning out of that process even into current days.
Mhm.
And I guess,
Yeah, it's
yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead, Alexis.
I was going to say your point about dominant cultures. You know, I'm American, and some of my U.S. friends might have thoughts and strong feelings on that. Like here, we get 3 days for bereavement. If you don't spend $20,000 on a casket, you don't love your parents enough, or things like that. We are still kind of hung up on Victorian era death ritual where you have to wear black for X amount of time, and then you can wear this color, and then you can let your hair down, and then there's it's and then and then. So we're kind of stuck in that very rigid death culture where we're like, we don't even want to deal with it. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to anything. And so the finding of ritual kind of outside those very strict, rigid parameters is tough unless you are, like you said, leaning back into kind of your cultural things that you can pull back in.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that those pieces of like some of us have been very disconnected from like our lineages, cultural practices, and some of us like have not been, or there's things maybe if we are even connected to them, maybe they, ones we grew up with, maybe we've had these experiences, but they don't always fit for us. And so it's like I often think about like, when I'm doing work with folks and creating ritual, it's so much of like figuring out like what feels right for you to do. Is there any pieces of this that you do know, maybe from your own lineages that do feel sincere that you can bring in, and then also sort of make fill in that other space with whatever feels sincere to you. Yeah.
And Chloe brings up a great point that US bereavement culture is very much performative for the people around you. And when you look kind of back at historical bereavement rituals and things with Egyptian and Vikings and things like that, it seems to me like those rituals are enshrined in making sure that your loved one on the other side has what they need. You're still looking out for them. You are still stewarding them and taking care of them from this realm to the next. And it seems, to Chloe's point, that US bereavement culture is about us. Look at me, look at me. I am grieving, look at me, which is a little different, and rather unfortunate.
Yeah, there can definitely be seen as like, is there the right way to be doing something, or the right way for something to be, perceived? And it makes me think of my vava, who's my Portuguese grandma, who is still alive. And she but when my grandpa passed away, and my family, at that part of my family is very Catholic, and when my grandpa passed away, like my grandma wore black for like about I don't know, 20 years, and it had only been the last like 7 or 8 years that she, there was like, she started wearing like a dark blue, and it was like, oh, Vava's wearing blue now, not just black. And it was this thing. And I remember at one of my cousin's weddings, I asked one of my aunts, like, why does grandma look so like, is she okay? Is she, like, what's happening for her? And it was like, oh, she can't show people that she's like having a good time, because then she thinks that they'll judge her. And I was like, grandpa died like 20 years ago. Does she really still think she needs to be like outwardly showing this, this like grieving widow experience? And it was Yeah, it definitely made me be like, something doesn't feel sincere. It doesn't add up. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I would say on the subject of ritual, that's kind of the opposite of ritual almost, because it's not you acting outward for a service, a reason, an emotional expression. It's you being acted upon by your society, your cultural group, or whatever, to be kind of put in this little box of what is acceptable grief and what isn't. And, I feel like there is no right way to grieve unless if you're hurting yourself or others, probably not a great plan. But if you're not, then your way of grieving is your way of grieving, and there is nothing right nor wrong about it. So it's just societal pressure does, to your point, really affect how we express our grief, which is why ritual arguably is of super import even in your private practice.
Mhm.
And Meredith has pointed out that sincere ritual compared to performative ritual is a really useful thing to reflect on. So, and says that they're really liking these framings. So, thank you.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
I
you.
definitely feel like that when when I'm working with folks around like creating ritual, or we're creating ritual for whether it's for like something personal or very intimate, or it's a community ritual, it's always like, what are the things that we're doing? And yeah, wanting them to be like sincere, like, are they useful, or is it kind of the like going through, the motions of things, which is like, is that, does that feel like the right thing to do, or like, do you have choice in that, or what choice do you have in that? It always, yeah, feels really really important to ask, for sure. Yeah.
And so, to your point, when we're talking about what is a ritual, when we say ritual, what does that mean to you? How do you explain, like, say, well, what is a ritual? How does it work? What would your kind of explanation be? And you can throw your own answer to that in the chat. I'm super excited to see what everyone's kind of take on that is. Yeah, and Elizabeth brings up a great point. I wonder if the empty ritual is an aspect of our inability to surrender to the unknown in a relationship of trust. I think that is absolutely, you're onto something there. And if you don't know what else to do, you can do something. It's there is at least something there, because if you are lost and you don't know what to do, a ritual is better than nothing.
Mm.
So Sharon, what's a ritual?
I think a ritual is something that is actions that is ceremonial in some, in some way. And I think a ritual could be anything as seemingly mundane or small as like, I think about the ritual where people who drink coffee, it's like a ritual of like making a coffee and just having that coffee in your hands. Or a ritual can be where, you cast a circle, you light a candle, you call in deities, you have maybe there's specific things that you do. So it can be like really anything, as sort of again, I always say like seemingly small or seemingly mundane, because those things are actually like can be very sacred and magical. And yeah, so I just think about it as like the intentional and contained. And even as I say intentional, I'm like, it's sometimes like maybe not intentional, maybe it's subconscious, but there is a ritual, that's happening. So kind of something that is again like ceremonial um in nature. So yeah, what would you say, Alexis?
I agree. I think a meaningful or symbolic act performed with intention is kind of the key there. They can be, individual, communal, elaborate, simple, anything that is done kind of with that I am acting out towards a force of intention. Intention, I think, is a really good key framework word for that. And I would say that, especially with the end of life and in the death community of ritual, focusing on honoring, processing, connecting with emotions or memories, anything to which you are acting out and there is an emotional or mental spiritual response, even if that's within oneself, of kind of a interior question answer.
Mm.
Michelle brings a great point too, that a ritual can be simply making your morning coffee or doing your skincare routine. Rituals can be mundane or magical. It really doesn't matter. I know I myself am neurodivergent. I'm autistic. So boy, howdy, do I have rituals that I have to do. And if I don't do them, my world falls apart. So, that's just going day-to-day life. Ooh, question. This is a good question. Would a ritual be something regular as opposed to a one-off? Sharon?
I mean, I think that you can do rituals as like part of everyday life, and they can also be a one-off ritual. So I think both of those things, if I'm answering your question in the way you intended. I think that um yeah, I think that ritual can truly look like so much. Like again, when I think about that sort of like uh, that that morning coffee versus like kind of setting up a whole space, and there's like a very like a 3 hour ritual with a group of people. So I think that it can be both. I don't think there needs to be I think in either can be equally important to folks. So, and I think we're going to talk about in a little bit about sort of creating rituals, and I think that can be something we can definitely think about, is what are sort of like a shorter, maybe smaller one, even that is a bit bigger or maybe needs more preparation, etc. So yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I'll give an example of a one-off ritual versus kind of a repeating ritual. Is I lost my mom about 10 years ago. And then of course we went through the standard ritual of the wake and the services and things like that. But every year on her birthday, I sing happy birthday to her urn. And that has become a recurring ritual, to keep and honor her from, her death forward. Elizabeth brings up a great point. I'm not sure I agree that any ritual is better than nothing. Might we be in danger then of falling into the performative and insincere? What if doing nothing is a powerful ritual? And let me clarify on what I mean by that. Is I'm not a particularly religious person, but when my mother died, I prayed because it was all I knew to do. And that brought me comfort, even though it wasn't particularly a faith practice that I was super active in. It was just comforting rather than not doing anything. Does that make sense? Okay.
I want to share something that just in regards to kind of the performative is so like I had said, my family is Portuguese, and or on my mom's side of the family is Portuguese, and I have gone to several funerals for family members at the Lady of Fatima Church. It's a Portuguese church in Vancouver, and where the services have been 100% in English, or sorry, in Portuguese, and I don't speak Portuguese. But I really appreciated, as I'm not Catholic, but and so I'm appreciative that I get to like see the ritual of the funeral and ceremony happen. And it was interesting for me to think about that as like literally watching the like performance of it, and instead of like taking in the Catholicism words. And it was just like an interesting experience of yeah, even thinking about where it was more useful for me to be there, not sort of taking in um, the religion that I don't connect to, but being able to like sort of almost watch it. And that felt like a good ritual for me. That felt more sincere than if it had been, I think, in English. It was easier for me to be there than if it was in English and I had, because it's the only language I speak, that I would have connected to. So just sort of a little kind of side note to something to think about. And I feel like better having I'm grateful that I've gone to all those funerals because I chose to go to them than if I hadn't. So just yeah, kind of something interesting. Um,
So you touched on what we're getting into of how to create your own ritual and kind of what makes a ritual. Like, how do you know if you're creating a ritual? How does that work for you, Sharon?
Yeah, I mean, I love rituals so much, and I feel like I've been doing ritual maybe sort of almost informally, I want to say, since I was a little kid. You know, I think about things where one of the things when I was really young, I loved going to the beach. I'm near the ocean, so going to the ocean, and I loved collecting little sand dollars, and I would put them, leave them on the beach, but I would kind of put them in little patterns around, and so it felt like this like ritual of like connecting to the ocean. But I think with creating ritual, it usually starts out with like what are we doing here? And it's almost like you want your intention is um like the thesis, you know, and so like everything should connect back to that thesis. Like what are all the pieces of this that what are we doing here? Thinking about the yeah, what are we doing? Or sorry, why are we doing this? So that's our intention. Who needs to be here? So that might be who needs to be here. As far as like other humans, animals, it might be the who of like if there's like spirits or deity or any kind of beings you want to call in. Um, what are we actually doing? Like, what will this sort of contained time look like? Um, and what am I missing? Who, what, where, when, why, how? Yeah, and actually geographically, you know, location as part of like what are we doing? Like make plans for that. So but I think it always comes back to like what is the hope and the purpose of this? What are we trying to achieve? And yeah, really sort of I think going from there. Yeah.
I agree completely. I think intentionality is kind of the whole point behind anything that we do in ritual work is like what's the point? What are we doing and why? Reflecting on what is meaningful either to yourself or the deceased or a mix of the two, and then choosing those symbolic actions, objects, or words. What are the parts and components of your ritual? Do you need a photo or an object of theirs? Do you want to light candles? Do you want to write verse? What kind of is your methodology? And then your timing, like we were discussing earlier, is it going to be a one-time thing, or are we going to do it every year on the birthday, the death date, Christmas, or another special day? And do you want to do solitary or involve others or a community or anything like that? So there's kind of like a basic building block skeleton of a ritual, I would say. And then kind of from there, it's Calvin ball. It's up to you.
Yeah, I often will, when I'm supporting people to create ritual, I will often start with asking, like, what are practices that you already have? Like, whether they are ritual practice or they are ceremony or they are cultural practices that you have. And that includes things like is there foods that have certain meaning? Is there, really like just sort of looking at like what's here already and kind of seeing that as like, do you have any like what's in your foundation now? And even things uh, and I'm thinking about working with folks particularly who have some like cultural disconnect because I think for me as a queer person that's like a common experience where folks are like disconnected, you know, from family or culture because of queerness, because of stigma, etc. And so really thinking about, well, what do you have or what do you know? Or is there, you know, maybe it's like you don't talk to your blood family, but you have this like these practices that you've had or things you want to bring back into your life, or you have like food is such an amazing way to connect with culture. So it's like those kind of pieces, I think bringing those in and really thinking like, yeah, what do you want to do? And that's something where, you know, I work commonly also with folks who I don't share a culture with, so I don't want to be appropriative, and like they can bring in those practices. And so it's like, okay, cool, we can bring in those to the ritual, and you can have space to, for your own practices. And even if I don't have to know them or know of them, but I can be here alongside you or help you build a build a practice, sort of centering those things or have them part of it. So yeah.
Elizabeth Jane has asked a question. Do you see ritual and ceremony as interchangeable, or are each a separate entity?
I think that a ritual has more room for personalization, to be casual, to be something that you can do in like the comfort of your own home. But when I think of a ceremony, that's something I think that has a more institutional structure than a ritual. Like a ritual is customizable, a ceremony is kind of A, B, C, D makes this thing to me.
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. It's funny because I'm like not I don't always have a very like strong vocabulary, so I feel like, oh, there's probably someone who's like the actual the dictionary definition of these two words is, and so I'm like, I'm sure there's lots of ways they could also be interchangeable to each other. And it's, yeah, I was kind of like seeing ritual as this like sort of bigger picture and ceremony that could like happen within that. And but yeah, so uh I think they can be interchangeable and separate. And also I think what Alexis says was great too. Yeah.
Because I think of a ritual and I think of like lighting a candle to honor someone, and then I think of ceremony and then I'm like graduation, wedding, things like that that have kind of a structure that we all like agree to, that when we go to a wedding, no matter what kind of faith or culture, we kind of know how it's going to go, whereas a ritual, who knows, it's whatever we want.
Yeah. Um, Alexis, I'm wondering if you'd be interested to share um, sort of any story or example of ritual or rituals or yeah, just like any sort of to sort of uh yeah, have some tangible way to see what some of these might look like.
Sure. I mean, I can talk about sin eating a little bit if folks are kind of unfamiliar with that. So, sin eating is traditionally a historical ritual that came over from Europe as a way to absolve from sin. There used to be ways of paying absolutions where you could essentially buy your way into heaven and things like that. The sin eating ritual is kind of modeled on the Christ structure of the bread and ale and things like that. So for a sin eating ritual, you have the body of the descendant there, and you have a loaf of bread in a wooden bowl and a cup of ale in a wooden cup. And through ritual and some magic words and prayer and things like that, the sins and the deeds of the descendant is absorbed into the bread and ale that your sin eater will come in and consume and take the burden of the sin upon themselves, absolving the descendant of it, and leave. And then the family will burn the bowl and the cup that is the connection between the two and sever that connection. And then it is, up to the sin eater and whatever their individual practice is of how they take that off of their shoulders. You are essentially picking up the baggage of the person that has left and taking it upon yourself and paying that spiritual price so that they are absolved and able to go to the heaven, the paradise of their culture or religion on the other side. So that is a small, very specific, like niche ritual. Could be interpreted as a ceremony because there is a specific way that it should be done, anthropology wise and historical practice wise. But that's my biggest ritual that I perform kind of as an end of life practitioner. And that is a very short, very like, bap, explanation of it. There's of course a little more complexity and things that go into it, but for the sake of simplification.
I can share about a community ritual that I've often been part of. So this is a ritual for Samhain, which is, Samhain is around the time of Halloween, All Saints Day, Dia de los Muertos, and All Hallows Eve, etc. And so in the witch lineages that I practice in, one of the things we do is have a big community ritual. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we do as sort of calling um, setting up our sacred space. So this is sort of the container, the circle we're working in. We call in different deities. We do like a practice of grounding. We honor the elements, honor our beloved dead. We honor our ancestors, descendants, so a bunch of stuff we do. And then the sort of main part of the ritual one of them is naming those who have passed this year. And so this is a naming aloud of anyone who's passed. And this is like anyone from animals to humans, etc. So they get named, and then we, as a collective, people are led to do something that sort of encourages those beings to sort of pass through the veil into their spirit lives. And then after that, we will usually do kind of like a trance sort of journey where people are invited to again be sort of led by someone who's priestessing and journey to, we call it the Isle of Apples, and they meet with an ancestor or someone. Sometimes it's and I also want to say ancestor, which could be of blood, of experiences of identity, etc. So I'm usually meeting with someone, kind of getting a message, and then coming back. We then do a celebratory spiral dance, which is literally people holding hands in a circle and like spiraling in and spiraling out. And you're looking at everyone there, because this is also the time of year that's known as the Witch's New Year. So, sort of this time of death and birth. And then after that, there will be a calling out of those who were born this year and welcoming them into life, into the world in this New Year time. So um, that's also a very quick version of it's like a 3-hour ritual. But yeah, really just sort of this like kind of honoring of like, yeah, the end of the year, the beginning of the year, birth and death and literal death. And it can be, yeah, really powerful experience, especially when I know one time in that ritual, I was reading the name of those who's passed, and all of a sudden I got the list that, so people are invited to write down, names, and I got the list, and it felt like someone slapped me across the face, because I was like, whoa, I have to read the list of the people who I wrote in my life who've all died this year, and I was not expecting that to happen. So it's also interesting what surprises can happen in ritual. So yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great example where mine was more like one or two people and yours is like a whole community coming together. So excellent, examples on each end. And I feel remiss in not addressing an elephant in the room, at least in United States culture, where our majority religion and culture is Christianity, Protestantism, and stuff like that. There is a divide that butts heads between Christian ritual and non-Christian, pagan, Wiccan, anything traditionally non-Christian. But when we really sit down and we look at it, they're not different at all. There's, you are lighting candles, you are putting flowers around a casket. Those are offerings. You are praying. You are speaking to your God. You are, in some cases, begging your God for contact, for visions, for communications. Like, if we take the verbiage of Christianity out of that and say it back to you, you would be like, oh my God, that's witchcraft. So the practices are not misaligned. We are just not talking about the same deity, but the practices are the same. And I think that's super important. And I just wanted to make sure we said that out loud.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alexis. It's really very yeah, definitely very yeah, I resonate deeply with that.
Yeah, I think it's great that you mentioned that, Alexis. And Meredith had actually mentioned in the chat that she'd never heard of sin eating before today, and that's fascinating. And I just had a question about the sin eating because you mentioned it arose in Europe. So, and I guess some of what you described does sound kind of pagan to me, but then I guess that word sin makes me think very much of Christian religion or Catholicism, particularly. So, can you just clarify a little bit more about sin eating,
Yeah.
where
It
say that its origins or something like that?
it originated within the church. It is a simplification and kind of a mimicking of Christ and communion and things like that, and the absolution of sin. And the sin eater was someone who a lot of villages sometimes did not have a priest or an abbot or a bishop or things like that, and they were the person that took those burdens onto themselves, and they were kind of a outcast and things like that, but they were super needed because who else was going to do it? And if you're worrying about your loved one making it to heaven, well, gotta call the sin eater. They're icky, but we need them. The practice did actually come over to the United States in the Appalachian area with the Scots Irish and English and all the folks that came over back when everybody was crossing, and it died out right before the turn of the 1900s. So it is being resurrected now. There's a couple of folks out there that are kind of teaching the practice. So it was long lived and wasn't as hissed at as you might think. It was something that was kind of included in the church, oddly enough.
Fascinating. Thank you. And also, Elizabeth Jane mentioned there are schools of thought that they all trace back to the same roots. So I think that sounds very accurate with what you've just told us about sin eating as well. Thanks.
Agreed. And Sharon, I want to touch on something that you said earlier about exploring cultures and everything. The internet is such a wonderful thing for being able for folks that might be estranged from their families. You don't need your family to find that cultural information. There are so many loving people out there that would want to share and reunite and bring back in kind of cultural orphans, to pass down traditions and things that are being lost. The internet is an amazing tool for being able to recapture your culture and fall back in love with it and fill your knowledge gaps. So if that happens to be the case for you, don't hesitate to look for your people.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree so much with that. And I just feel like yeah, like I had said earlier, especially like with my life being very, I don't know, queer centric, not only, but definitely queer centric, is that it's such a common experience for so many folks to feel yeah, to really feel that disconnect. And it just feels so important to be able to yeah, kind of find the ways of being. And I think it's also important like in thinking about, because there might be practices again that you have or are connected to, but I think about performative or like the going through the motions where maybe I don't actually understand the root of this or why that's, you know, why this is happening. And I remember like at I was at a funeral and I had asked the priest, they were putting like sand on the outside of the coffin, and I had asked the priest there who you know, I said, oh, what are you doing, why are you doing that? And it was an interesting moment because he was a priest who spoke mostly Portuguese with sort of bits of English, and he said, and he kind of tried to look for the words, and he said, well, in the end we all turn to dust. And I was like, yeah, that's a very pagan thing to say. And I was very surprised by it, but it was like, oh, that's interesting, like maybe there's more things that I can connect to than not, you know. So because it can really be easy for me to find the things I don't feel connected to. So yeah, it kind of goes back to that comment of like that, yeah, maybe a lot of things do actually have the same roots, and yeah.
And I wanted to check my own homework. The rising of sin eating was 17th century Wales in English, out in the Marcia area, which were outside of where they traditionally had the structure of the church. They just kind of did their own thing in the image of Christ, in the kind of image of communion, just to do something because they didn't have anybody, no representatives from the church out there, and kind of the boonies, as we call it. So that's where it started, because I was like, wait, am I right or am I wrong? So
And Elizabeth Jane's also put up a link to a book about sin eaters as well.
Great.
yeah, it's a great book. It's a kind of a dramatization, but it's a wonderful, really engaging, fascinating, heartfelt book. It's awesome.
Mhm.
Yes, correct. Interesting. Wales was the last stronghold of the Druids too. And we would be remiss also if we mention, like, to the comparison of like Christianity and non-Christianity rituals, that Christianity did pull in a lot of pagan rituals. We look at Christmas and things like that. So there's always overlap somewhere, to the point of we all kind of came from one place and expanded. There's so many common themes in ritual across cultures, across generations, across races, communities, everything like that. There are always like a few common cores to ritual. And I just find that so fascinating that no matter how we choose to label and divide ourselves as people and communities, that there are still kind of these core things that we all seek to address out of our kind of primordial fears.
Yeah, I feel that so much. Mm.
We have any questions? I will tell you, to the point about primordial fears, is there's a quote that always sticks with me that says, man fears the darkness, so he cuts away at the edges of it with fire. And that's kind of how I feel about ritual and practice and anything we do at end of life. Is we fear that darkness of the unknown and what comes next, because there's no way of knowing, depending on your spiritual beliefs and your spiritual experiences and things like that. We just simply don't know. And that's terrifying, kind of on an existential level. That's really scary. Like, what happens to me? What was it all for? When will I be forgotten? And ritual does do a lot to kind of build a mental defense against that. And I think that that is so cool.
Yeah, I think really going to that, talking a lot about just like having choice, like what do we have choice in, and like choice in like how do we respond? And I think ritual and ceremony is a way to respond. It's a way to also be active, proactive, and yeah, like being having choice or autonomy over our process, and also like taking initiative to tend to whatever is present, and like taking time for these processes, and yeah, and thinking about that. Someone had mentioned, I don't know if Alexis or someone else, about this, like the 3 days of bereavement, and it's like that's like what an arbitrary what an arbitrary like number to say. And yeah, it's interesting.
Oh, you've had 72 hours. You should be fine. Get back to work. Said
Yeah,
no one healthy ever. Um,
yeah,
time is money, friend. Back to your desk. no, no, no.
Yeah.
And so here's a question for you, Sharon, that I was thinking about, because I was thinking when we talk about ritual and the things we do to kind of like push back at the scary unknown, is superstition. In the
Mm-hmm.
South, here in the US, we have so many death superstitions. Like we'll cover mirrors and we'll stop clocks and, things like that. So how do you think superstition butts up to ritual?
Yeah, it's interesting. A really dear, oops, dropped my phone, sorry. A dear witch friend of mine, Theo, had recently asked about this sort of in a public forum of like how do you see superstition showing up? And I was thinking about this as like it's like I have a hard time knowing if something's superstition or it's like some intuition or if it's like anxiety or like what is it that's showing up. And so I really think about sort of when I think about superstition, I think about like that feels like are those your own personal superstitions or are they sort of collective or cultural superstitions, and are those things that are of like important ritual or practice. And so what it's making me think of, and this might be sort of going on a tangent, but what it's making me think about is so where I am here on the west coast of Canada, we have many. It's literally I live in an area where there's like the most um, uh, different indigenous nations. Like in this area, there's the most yeah, many different nations, and so there's a lot of different practices. But I'm thinking particularly one of my former coworkers who is Niska and another from another nation, which I'm blanking on right now. But she had invited us in to do like a ceremony. And one of the things that happened was during the ceremony, there was a tobacco pipe that was being passed around and it was dropped on the ground. And even when I say ceremony, this was definitely like her naming this as ceremony and not ritual. And so I'm thinking just to say that in that conversation earlier, about sort of which one's which. But the pipe was dropped, and so she said to someone, she said, go outside, and she had said do these very specific things, and it was like about 6 or 7 steps in order, and it was for the person to put a certain medicines out, and um, and she was like she kind of stopped everything and did this, and the other person did that, and then they came back into the ceremony, and then it continued on. And I was thinking about that's something where it was like, oh, that's like not a superstition, that's a protocol. So that's like this, and I think if I would to call that and again, it's not like culturally that's not something even a culture I've say over or whatever, but it really understood it as like, okay, this is something, and it felt so important to do in a specific way, because where I am, the way colonization has happened with indigenous folks is that ceremonies, it's sort of this idea that one of the first things that gets taken away is ceremony and gods and rituals, etc. And so that protocol was so important because that was like such sacred special information that at one point was probably passed along in a very secretive way to protect it from colonization trying to cut it off, like many things. So that's sort of a tangent, but that was the long this is how my brain works. This is a long sort of way to think about a superstition protocol, or is superstition like, yeah, these important practices. So yeah, that's again sort of long-winded, but yeah.
You know what though? That's a really, I think you nailed the distinction there for me, because in my head, I'm thinking superstitions are for protection, spiritual, emotional, physical, or whatever, because it's like, don't step on a crack, you'll break your mother's back. Don't step under a ladder, it's going to be for bad luck. The hanging of the cloths over mirrors in Southern Appalachian tradition is to protect the soul of the person who's recently deceased so they don't see their reflection and get lost. And the stopping of the time is much similar, so that they don't they're not stuck and they see time moving and they get lost spiritually and trapped on earth and things. And these are old, like Southern traditions and things. And so ritual, like we've talked about, is more emotional expression, honoring, etc. But I think we might have stumbled upon that superstition is more safety and protection. No? Am I off base?
Yeah, I love thinking about that. That really makes so much sense. It's like we do these as protections. Yeah.
Oh, I feel so big brain
I
right
feel like
now.
respect. Oh, sorry, my brain was running too, Alexis, and I feel like respect is a really big part of particularly that story you told, Sharon. It's yes, just that word respect just kept resonating to me.
Mhm.
Cheryl, that's beautiful. Cheryl says, a friend of mine died 3 weeks ago, and I am realizing that planning a ritual for her would be very useful for me at this time. She was very nature oriented, as am I, so it will be a nature based ritual. That's beautiful. That is you processing and feeling and being interactive with this process. That is just perfect.
Yeah, and nature is so amazing. I feel like even though nature is different geographically in different places, it's such a like I mean, earth, air, fire, water, like those exist everywhere in some way. And there's so much you can do with that. Yeah, that's really beautiful. We have like 7 minutes left of our time. So I don't know, Alexis, is there anything that you are thinking of or want to say or share? And we can even, I'm sure, have a few minutes for folks as well.
Oh, yes,
I've
thank
just
you.
added your links in the chat as well, so that people can get in touch with you or follow what you are doing. And I just wanted to also mention about how Elizabeth Jane mentioned about that superstition as protection is often in the UK linked to good luck and bad luck. So it's it sounds like you really got us thinking about those things in regards to superstition.
Yeah,
But yeah,
because
any last messages?
yeah, here in the South, all superstition is especially death superstition is like, do this thing or something really bad is gonna happen. So like to you or your loved ones or whatever. It's wild. There's some really wacky stuff that we do here in the South. If you don't cover that mirror, their soul's gonna be stuck here forever and it's all your fault.
Yeah, it's interesting where sometimes we don't think we're so powerful, but then we can also hold these beliefs like that to be like someone's soul's, journey may rest on you doing this very specific thing. And it's like can also be a lot of pressure.
And see, I was thinking about ritual for us versus ritual for them because I kind of think that grief is for us, you know, they are gone and grief is the price we pay in kind of inverse of the amount of love. You hear the saying that great grief is the price of great love, and ritual after they've gone is an expression of us, of course, and our force workings and you know our magic and our spiritualness and things like that here. um that is a really kind of finishing thought for me of how much of ritual is for us or versus the other side, because as we were talking about earlier in historical religion and ritual and things is, I'm going to leave these offerings, I'm going to leave these things in this tomb so that they have these things on the other side and they are taken care of. And so when we intermix grief into that, it's also for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much to hear that. I think I would say a sort of a final thought is like ritual is like we said, it can be so many different things. And I would really say try things out and also like again in whatever way it feels right for you, like invite other folks into it. Like I do a ton of like teaching. I do pre-16 and different rituals, all kinds of things. And I am constantly doubting myself to be like, oh, there's this like practice or this like experience I could invite folks into. And is it going to be silly? Is it going to be like, are people going to want to do it? Or is it like too simple? Or, and it's like so much of us are just like, we are just like craving to be doing something. And there's also like, I mean, I think if we're all going to survive this wild, strange, beautiful world, we're going to do it together. And so like inviting people into ritual, even if you're like, let's all figure this out together. Like let's try something out. And there's so many different resources in many different places. And I think it's just really like if it feels like you're taking a risk or taking a chance or uncertain, like there's absolutely um like just try something and see what it feels like, and then know maybe next time you do it, you do something a little different, or there's something you're like, oh, that really worked, so let's like build off of that. And just yeah, like allow yourselves to have an experience. And again, it could be seemingly small or quite big. So yeah.
Yeah, I think what resonates for you works for you. If you don't know, just kind of go inside and think, listen to your heart, and the little voice inside you will whisper a spark of something, and you can go from there. You will find what is natural and right for you. What resonates is right. And as long as you aren't hurting yourself or others, and you're respectful of, things like closed practices, there's no wrong answer. Do whatever brings you most comfort. We're all doing this for the first time, not to speak to reincarnation theory or anything, but like, who knows? No one wrote us a manual. I wasn't born here with a manual of how to do any of this. So we do the best we can with what we have and try to do as little harm in the process.
Yeah.
Thank you,
100%
Alexis.
agree.
That's a great way to finish, I think, and some wonderful, reassuring comments for some of us. And there's a lot of thank yous and comments in the chat about what a wonderful conversation this has been. I also just added to the chat a couple of comments back, some links to the GoFundMe page and also the merch page, because as many of you probably know, this is a volunteer-run festival, and for it to continue, we need to get some money in. So I'd just like to thank you, Alexis and Sharon, for a wonderful discussion, and I'd like to thank everybody for participating today.